would like to welcome you to Behind the Chair with JP Hair Design. Today our guest is Vince Murray. He's an assistant state public defender. And I thought bringing Vince on to talk to us about some of the things that we can do to protect ourselves and be educated, you know, be a good thing. How's it going there, Vince?
I'm good, Jay. Appreciate you having me on the show. Feeling good, got a fresh cut. Happy to be here.
Yes, sir.
Thanks.
Yeah. So, Vince, would you want to give everybody a little bit of background of, you know, where you're from and how you got into, you know, being a public defender?
Sure, absolutely. Well, I'm a Madison native. I was born and raised here in Madison. Grew up right off Fish Hatchery Road. You know, I was a Southside Raider. Went to West High School. Ended up graduating from Edgewood High School. Did my undergrad at UW Whitewater. I studied finance, and one of the things, I also had a minor in philosophy, so one of the things I really got interested in when I was studying philosophy is theories of punishment, theories of retribution, things like that. And as I studied, the more I learned that we're a very retributive country here. We lock people up for what I think far too long. We lock too many people up for far too long. Okay. So that was one of the things I became passionate about. So I decided I wanted to pursue a career in criminal justice to sort of try to mitigate some of that retributive inclinations, some of those inclinations that we have in this country. There's a statistic that's often quoted. The United States has about 5% of the world's population, but we also have about 25% of the world's prisoners. So we incarcerate people at a higher rate than any other country in the world. We actually have more prisoners in this country than there are in China. Wow. And China's got over 1 billion more citizens than we have. Okay. So, you know, we call ourselves the land of the free, but when you take a look at our prison populations, you wouldn't know that. Wow. So that's why I got into criminal defense, because I wanted to do what I could to try to mitigate some of that mass incarceration that's going on in this country.
Right. That's some good information there, Vince. What would you say to someone that get arrested and they have to deal with the police? You know, what are some of the rights they should know they should do?
Sure, absolutely. So, obviously, I would advise everyone, caution you not to do anything illegal. You know, that's the best way you can stay out of police contact. But some of us, we find ourselves in some situations that we don't anticipate, and when you do get in those situations, you should know what your rights are so you can protect yourself. The first thing I would advise you to do is definitely always be respectful to the officers. A lot of people think it's kind of cool to be a jerk or to get mouthy with the officers when you assert your rights. I highly advise against that. That's not a good idea. It doesn't do anybody any good. In fact, it probably does you more harm than good, because it looks really bad once that gets on paper and it's contained in a criminal complaint that you are not cooperative. Right. So the first thing I would say is always be respectful. The second thing I would say is ask an officer, are you detained or are you free to leave? When you're talking to a police officer, you always have the right to walk away unless you're being detained. Okay. So ask the officer straight up, as soon as you're with him, am I free to leave? And if not, that means you're being detained. Okay. If you are being detained, generally that means you're a suspect. Okay. That means the officers are investigating a crime, and they're trying to gather information from you in furtherance of their investigation. Okay. So if you are a suspect, you should protect yourself. One thing you don't have to do is speak to the police, okay? Again, I always recommend you be cooperative, but you can assert your rights in a respectable manner, a respectful manner. So, an officer, a lot of times, you know, you've heard on TV, or if you have been arrested, they'll read you your Miranda rights, and they'll tell you that you have the right to remain silent, that anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. That's the truth. Anything you say can and absolutely will be used against you in a court of law. So you want to be very careful about what you do say to an officer. I would recommend that you request an attorney. Now an officer, these guys are trained interrogators, so they're very good at what they do. They're good at extracting information. They're good at getting you to say what they want to hear.
And you're talking about officers right now.
Officers are very good at what they do. So they know how to make you feel comfortable. You know, they'll tell you things to put you at ease and sort of try to extract information from you. Okay. But if you're being detained by an officer of the law, they're not on your side, okay?
Now, when you say detained, you mean arrested? Or, I mean, when you say detained, what exactly are you saying?
Well, detainment is actually not being arrested. They can hold you for questioning without actually arresting you. Okay. What that's called is a custodial interrogation, if you're being detained or arrested and they start asking you questions. But they can detain you without actually arresting you. So there's a different standard that they have to use to detain you. They have to have probable cause to arrest you, but they only have to have reasonable suspicion to detain you. Okay. So they can detain you before they can arrest you. And generally when they detain you, they're trying to find facts that would give them probable cause to arrest you.
Gotcha.
So be very careful about what you say to an officer, and don't be afraid to assert your right of silence. Mm-hmm. One thing that I recommend doing is asking for an attorney. Now, you don't have to tell an officer that I'm not going to speak to you or I'm not going to cooperate with you. Right. But I would recommend that you let them know if you do want to say something to them, especially after them having told you that anything that you say will be used against you. Right. Tell them you would prefer that an attorney was with you before you made any statements to the officer. Right. Once you say that, an officer has to stop questioning you. They cannot ask you any more questions once you request an attorney. So that's something I strongly advise you to do if you do find yourself detained and being interrogated by an officer. Request an attorney. Right.
What are some of the misconceptions when it comes to police officers?
Sure. Well, I'll tell you, one of the biggest things I hear from my clients is they tell me, you know, I was arrested, but the cops didn't read me my rights. So they think the case should just be thrown out. Okay. That's a huge misconception. That's not how it works. Okay. An officer does not have to read you your Miranda rights to arrest you. What they have to do is they have to Mirandize you before they conduct a custodial interrogation. Gotcha. So they can arrest you, they can book you, they can take you to jail. They don't have to read you your rights. Right. But if they sit you down and they start asking you questions in furtherance of an investigation, they have to let you know that you have these rights: the right to remain silent, the right to an attorney. If you can't afford an attorney, one will be appointed to you. Right. So that's when the Miranda comes into play. Okay. Before they start interrogating you. And if they don't Mirandize you and they start asking you questions, that itself also, that doesn't necessarily mean the case gets thrown out, but what that does mean is that any statements you make to the officer cannot be used as evidence in court. So that's what that means, and that's one of the most common misconceptions that I hear from clients.
Yeah. And as a public defender, do you guys have a lot of people that's, guilty, and then you have to go and try to, protect them or defend them? I mean, how does that work?
Sure. Well, technically, nobody's guilty until they're convicted. Okay. So we defend people who are accused of crimes, and that's what we do. Another common misconception is that defense attorneys, our job is just to set guilty people free. Okay. While that does happen in rare occasions, generally that's not what the majority of our job is. What we try to do, the first thing we're here to do as defense attorneys is we act as a check on the power of the state. Okay. So the state has to do their job. Okay. If there's no check on the state power, they can just railroad clients through the criminal justice system. So we're here to protect our clients and make sure that their rights are protected. Generally what we do is we try to negotiate favorable resolutions for our clients. So again, we're not just setting guilty people free. We're trying to make sure that any resolution that does happen is fair and that they're not just vulnerable and put at risk of being railroaded through the system by the state. So that's generally what we do.
Okay. So how long have you been doing this?
Sure. Well, I started law school in '09. I graduated in 2012, and I was lucky enough to get a job doing exactly what I wanted to do. So I've been a public defender in Green Bay since July. Okay. And I've had, since then, we have quite a caseload that we have to have. So I've handled well over 100 cases so far. Okay. All sorts of cases: felonies, juveniles, misdemeanors, that sort of thing. Okay. Are there some other tips you would like to give, people? Yeah, well, one of the things I think a lot of people should know is that if you're in a vehicle and you're on the road, you are putting yourself at risk of being pulled over. There are hundreds and hundreds of things an officer can use as probable cause to pull you over. So for example, if you're going a mile over the speed limit, if you're going 26 into 25, technically you're breaking the law and an officer can pull you over. Okay. My point is, if you're on the road, you do not want to have anything in that vehicle that you don't want to be found, okay? Because like I said, about at least 90% of the time you're on the road, they can find something that they can use to pull you over. For example, if you have, like some people like to have their dice hanging from the rearview mirror or their rosary beads, things like that. If that's obstructing your view, an officer can use that to pull you over. If you're not wearing your seatbelt, if your tags aren't registered, if you're the registered owner of the vehicle and your license is not valid, if you have a headlight out, tail light out, blinker out. So there's so many things that an officer can use to pull you over that you do not want to find yourself in a situation where you have something in that vehicle that you don't want to be found. Because, like I said, they can pull you over and you're putting yourself at risk if you're on the road. Okay.
So if someone, get in a situation like that, is it somewhere they can call, some information that they can get to help them, in this situation?
Well, When I would say the great thing about Wisconsin is that we have a very good public defender agency, okay? And you can always apply to get yourself an attorney. We represent everybody. Unfortunately, you have to be under a certain income level for us to represent you, but you can always pick up the phone and ask to just speak to an attorney and get some legal advice. All the public defenders I know are very good at what they do, and they care about what they do, and that they'd be happy to speak to you about that. But generally, if you do find yourself in a situation where you are being detained and questioned by an officer, if you ask for a lawyer, they have to stop questioning you. So that's generally what I would recommend.
Okay. Vince, what about like search and seizure? Somebody come, to your house and want to come in and search your house. I mean, what's your rights on that?
Well, you absolutely have the right to refuse giving an officer permission to search anything. And I highly recommend you exercise that right, especially if there's something that you don't want to be found. You never have to give an officer permission to search. And they're very good at what they do. Sometimes they'll say things to you that might put you under the impression that you have to let them search. That's absolutely not the case. If they want to search your home, they need to get a warrant, or else there has to be some sort of exigent circumstance before they can lawfully enter your place of residence. So I highly recommend that you do not let an officer search your home without a warrant. In fact, if an officer approaches you at your door, what I recommend is you answer the door, step outside of your door, and shut the door behind you, and then speak with the officer there. Again, you do not have to give them permission to search your home, or anything for that matter.
Okay. So as a public defender, do you guys get a bad rep? I mean, like this video here, you're educating, our viewers on their rights, and you may have, officers that say, man, I want it easy for me, but this interview would probably make it harder for them. I mean, what's your take on that?
Sure. Well, officers are public servants. They make an oath to uphold the law. Generally, I don't think most officers have a problem with individuals who assert their rights in a respectable manner. Sometimes it does make their job more difficult if you're not willing to speak to them. So sometimes they may prefer that you open up and that you confess and so forth. But as I said, if you're being investigated, that means you're a suspect and the officers are not on your side. So you do not want to put yourself in a situation whereby you are incriminating yourself or exposing yourself to prosecution. And again, public defenders, we do get a bad rap. You hear the term a public pretender, or a lot of my clients tell me, you're a public defender, I'm going to get myself a real lawyer, things like that. There's a general perception out there that public defenders, that we don't care about our clients, that we're not going to work for them, and that we're not going to fight for them. I can tell you that in my experience, that is absolutely not the case. Wisconsin has a very good public defender agency, and every attorney that I've met that works for the public defender's office is very passionate about what they do, and they care about their job, otherwise they wouldn't be doing it. They don't pay us a whole lot of money, so it takes a certain person to do this job, and the people that are doing it because they care, and it's not because it's just a job and they just want to get through it. It takes a certain person to do it, and everybody I know who works as a public defender really does care about their clients and are passionate about what they do.
Well, I want to thank you for coming in, Vince.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I think you gave us some good information. One thing I want to say to our viewers, we want to make good decisions. We don't want to be in situations where we need to call a public defender. We want to follow the rules, follow the laws, but in some circumstances, you may need to depend on a public defender. So we want to thank you for coming in.
My pleasure.